Hey, welcome to another episode of A Critic's Journey, and this time I went back and took a look at a film that is still universally classed as one of the best action films ever. I'm talking about The Rock, of course, starring Sean Connery and Nicolas Cage. Now, this is once again a movie that I watched when I was back at high school, and it's, funnily enough, I probably didn't embrace this movie enough back then. I guess for teenage me, it didn't quite have as much action as I wanted. And it's kind of weird going back and looking at this movie now, because we are so used to the kind of films that Michael Bay has made, say, over the last 10 years, that you kind of forget that back early on in his career in the 90s, the guy was actually making movies that were quite universally praised by critics, really. You look at what's happened over the last few years with his career, and like different films like the Transformers franchise, for example, and you think of all the vitriol that he cops from critics over those movies, and you almost forget that there was a time when he was making movies like The Rock that were actually getting some pretty good praise. He made Armageddon, which of course was another fan favorite, but critics didn't really like it. He made Bad Boys, of course, which was an absolutely fantastic film, still to this day one of the best ever action films. But yeah, films like The Rock are just a reminder of what Michael Bay is capable of as a director, and this is a pretty smart action film. I mean, you don't talk Sean Connery into doing a film unless it's halfway decent. I mean, we laugh at films like Entrapment and stuff like that, but when you go back and watch them, they're actually quite an interesting film to watch. Now, for those that have never seen The Rock, it's basically about a general played by Ed Harris who feels that that past soldiers are being wronged by the government, that there's this slush fund that the government has put together, and that money should be going towards soldiers that have suffered from their past missions, etc. Hey, not a lot's changed. There's still a lot of people out there saying that we should be looking after our soldiers a lot better, and so we should. So maybe this film was a little bit ahead of its time. Now, he basically goes to Alcatraz and sets up all these weaponized missiles that he's going to fire back into San Fran and wipe out part of the population if he doesn't get what he wants. Now, brought in to try and fix this situation is an FBI CIA agent who is an expert in chemicals, Stanley Goodspeed, played by Nicolas Cage, and they also recruit a prisoner who is one of the only people who ever escaped from Alcatraz. His name is John Patrick Mason, played by Sean Connery. Now, going back and having a look at this movie now, it's quite interesting to watch. First of all, we need to be reminded that Quentin Tarantino was an uncredited screenwriter on this film, and there's quite a few Tarantino kind of feel scenes in this movie, especially around the Nicolas Cage character. This is one of those movies where people talk about that kind of style of acting that Nicolas Cage has got, where he's like just that little bit unhinged. It really feels in this movie that Tarantino had a lot to do with that, even though he's uncredited as a screenwriter. There's just that kind of Tarantino feel to his character that you get with other characters in films like Pulp Fiction and stuff like that. Jackie Brown, which is still one of my favorite Quentin Tarantino films, that feel is here in this film. It does have its Michael Bay weaknesses, and I'm not going to sit here and say The Rock is a perfect film. It's not. There's bits in this movie where you're like, really, you had to do that before you got to Alcatraz? And I'm talking about the tram car kind of chase and explosion sequence, and it's like, it's typical Michael Bay. And I'm not going to say that I hate Michael Bay. I love Michael Bay's films, and even like his bad films, I still love seeing there. But let's face it, Michael Bay was that kid that in the playground that was blowing up Transformer toys with whatever kind of little explosives he could find in his school. And that's in this movie too. Michael Bay loves explosions. He's always going to put them in there, and you get that with this movie. There's bits early on in this movie where you kind of like, really, did you need to chase that early on? It feels like there's a lot of work that goes into this just to get Mason out onto Alcatraz. It's just, yeah, it's pure Michael Bay escapism when you watch that. The real action for this movie takes place when they get out onto the island. And one of the things that hit me going back and watching this movie was that really all your interest in this film is on Stanley and Mason. It's all on Sean Connery. It's all on Nicolas Cage. You really don't care what's happening back on the mainland with the orders and everything like that. And of course, you have that whole thing where an attack is ordered while those two are there because they think they're dead. That part's interesting, but for the most part, you do not care what's going on outside of Alcatraz at that time. The whole thing about putting Stanley's girlfriend in there and stuff, it's just, I don't know, it's just one of those things where you kind of like, really? I don't really need this storyline. It doesn't need to be there. So it's like, I don't fully adhere to the whole thing that's happening in Hollywood at the moment where they say that there haven't always been strong female characters, because I think there have been strong female characters all throughout Hollywood. But this is one of those movies where you kind of think that really the female characters in this film are completely wasted. And yeah, if you want to go down that path, then I guess this is one of those movies that you could use as an example. There's no need for that character to be there. If you wanted a great, strong female character, put one as part of the team that's helping save the day kind of thing. So, but look, I did enjoy going back watching this movie. I love Sean Connery in this film. I think even Nicolas Cage is underrated in this film. He does an absolutely fantastic performance here. And you look at some of the action movies that come out these days, and acting is not a strong thing for most of those films, but here, these guys have been given great characters, and they just do remarkably well in those roles. I still think it's one of Sean Connery's best roles, and that's what I wanted to talk about. So, I didn't know this until I went to watch this film. There's a theory that Mason is actually a discarded Bond. Now, it's been talked about a fair bit, on different podcasts and things like that. And I can actually see it when I watch this film. There's little references in there that Mason talks about where he goes training from and stuff like that. Now, apparently, if you're a Bond fan, right now you're probably screaming at where you're listening to this that the timeline doesn't add up. And I agree, it doesn't. The timeline doesn't add up with ages or anything like that Connery is playing his version of Bond in this film. Although it feels like it. So take with that what you want. The timeline doesn't add up, but it does feel like it. And there's some little things that have been put in there that kind of make you feel like, yeah, maybe Connery is playing a Bond here. A washed up Bond that's been imprisoned. So, yeah, it's interesting. But look, go and watch this movie. The suspense in this film is great. Believe it or not, I'm actually going to say this, it feels like one of Michael Bay's most believable films, in that it almost has a thriller vibe to it more than an action vibe. I feel that it works. Love Connery in this, love Cage in this. Their performances are underrated, both of them. I'm going to give this one 4 out of 5. If you haven't had a chance to go back and watch The Rock for a while, go back and watch it. Absolutely great kind of thriller action film. One of Michael Bay's best films. Not surprisingly, it's his favourite film that he's ever made. But yeah, just watch it for Connery and watch it for Cage. 4 out of 5.